Hello and welcome to yet another video. This is the 8th episode of the story in which Naruto is adopted at a young age. How far can he go if someone actually supports him? How will he influence the elemental nations? This story is from a writing bunny. Please support him, her. Please like and subscribe to show your support. Let's get the show started. Tree hideout. Naruto was staring at his right hand. There was a thin red line on the back side of it. It had been 6 days since he had first discovered it, and since then it didn't change one bit. He racked his brain to find out what it could mean. He couldn't come up with anything. The worst thing was that he didn't even know how and when did it appear. He didn't have it before the fateful banquet, that much he was sure about. He had discovered it on the next day. And ever since then it stayed with him. He ran his left thumb across it. It didn't feel any different from the rest of his skin. He sighed. It didn't seem like he would figure out anything today. His ears detected a soft sound. He stiffened for a moment and then relaxed. It was only Tenzo. He watched as his guardian climbed through the door. "Hello," he greeted. "Hello," Naruto answered. "Why so down today?" the Mokuton wielder asked. "Why not?" the Jinchuriki shrugged. "It's not like you," the older man pointed out. "You're right," the blonde sighed. "It's just that so many things happened." "Anything particular?" the Jounin inquired. "Well, yes." Naruto told him about the meeting with the Kyuubi and the demon's ultimatum and the subsequent confrontation during the battle. "I see," Tenzo said gravely. "You did well when you refused its offer." "Thanks," the child replied. "That's what I needed to hear." "What would have happened if I accepted?" "I'm not sure," his guardian shrugged. "There is much about the Yondaime seal no one else understands." "Can you make a guess?" the demon vessel prodded. "Well," the man shrugged, "I'm no seal master." "Can you try anyway?" Naruto prodded. "There is some suspicion that the seal might be weakened by extensive use of its chakra," he offered. "Define extensive." Tenzo only shrugged again. "There are no data." "Figures." Naruto grimaced. "Do you think I weakened it much in Suna?" "I can't sense any more Yuki than usual," the Mokuton user answered. "That's good to hear." There was a moment of silence. "Do you think I will have to use it again much?" "What? Would I have to use the Kyuubi's power a lot?" the blonde clarified. "There's going to be a war. I know what I'm supposed to be, a human weapon. Would I have to use it in many battles?" "Don't think of yourself that way," Tenzo chided. "What?" Naruto raised an eyebrow. "A weapon," the Jounin answered. "You're human. Never forget it." "You don't have to tell that to me," he pointed out. "But others don't see it that way. And an order is an order." "That it is." He sighed deeply. "You shouldn't have been thrown into this so young." "I'm sorry." "It's not your fault," Naruto consoled him. "I think I would have wanted to help with the war anyway." "War is a nasty business," the former ANBU said. "I can tell from what little I saw," the young ninja replied. "You still have no idea how bad it really is." "I guess so." He sighed. "So what are we going to do now?" "The same as usual," Tenzo answered. "You need to get stronger to survive." "Yes. And I should do it fast." In Izuka clan compound ever since they came back from Suna, Kiba was giddy with excitement. The terrible occurrence during the banquet was pushed to the back of his mind. They tended to come out during the nights and haunt him in nightmares, but during the day there was no place for them. All that mattered was that he would be getting a new dog. He kept talking about it all the time until Tsum threatened to reconsider her earlier statement that he was finally mature enough. That managed to shut him up, but did nothing to tone down his elation. And then finally the big day came. "So this is him?" The young Inuzuka boy was looking at the white puppy with drooping dark ears with mixed feelings. Yes, Kiba, Tsum confirmed, this is Akamaru. Don't you like him? I do, the boy answered, he's cute, but isn't he kinda tiny? Akamaru whined. He didn't consider himself cute. And just what did you expect? Hana commented. A big bad wolf? The Haimaru were small as well when I first got them. The half-grown puppies barked in agreement. Don't worry, Kiba, he'll grow up in no time. Can't I get 3 dogs like sister? Akamaru barked unhappily and bared his teeth. Sorry, boy, Kiba apologized. I didn't mean that you aren't good enough. The little white dog whined. I already apologized, the boy said. What else do you want? A treat, you dolt, Hana answered. Honestly, Kiba, don't you know anything about dogs? Of course, the youngest of the family took offense. I'm an Inuzuka. Could have fooled me, his sister smirked. Cut it, you too, Tsum interrupted. Introductions are over, it's time for training. There's still something I want to know, the boy asked. Why is he called Akamaru? You'll find out soon enough. Hokage's office. When the Hokage had first read the letter from the Tsuchikage, he had thought his eyes had finally started deceiving him in his old age. But nope, even after he had blinked several times the text stayed the same. The next possibility was that one of them finally got senile if he could think this was a perfectly legitimate demand. That couldn't be discarded, but he doubted Onoki would still hold his position if that was the case. In the end, he had decided that that was just his attempt to make IWA look like the injured party here, though in an extremely outrageous manner, and threw the letter into his trash bin after crumpling it into a ball. He had considered the matter closed, but somebody had a different plan. Sarutobi had already resolved to severely punish whoever had dug the paper out of the bin, smoothed it and showed it to every moderately important person in Konoha. And now every moderately important person in Konoha demanded audience with him, wanting to know what he was going to do about said ridiculous demand. He had to move the gathering to the council chamber so everybody could fit in. It was crowded there anyway. So now that everybody's here, he began, can we go down to business? And please speak only one at a time. He barely finished when 4 people spoke at once. Others soon followed. Silence. He accentuated his order by hitting the table. He was mildly surprised when it actually worked. Now we can really start, and please now really one at a time, or I won't lose my time with you anymore. In case you haven't noticed, we're at the verge of a war and I'm busy. The assorted delegates exchanged glances, deciding who should speak first. Unsurprisingly, it was Satoru who got the word. The war is what we came to talk about. An opportunity to prevent it arose. Why would you discard it? Opportunity to prevent war? Tsum snorted. She was there only because all the other clan heads were going. Don't make me laugh. You weren't in Suna when it happened. If you were, you would know there's no way to avoid the war now. Too many important people died for that and the daimyos are vying for blood. So give them blood of the one who started it, Satoru replied. That's easier said than done, Satoru-san, Sarutobi replied. The problem is we don't know who had started the battle. How can you say that? The furious councilman pointed to his copy of the Tsuchikage's letter. It's crystal clear who's at fault. And that letter is the only proof you have? The Sandame raised an eyebrow. Satoru looked a bit taken aback, but he overcame it quickly. Yes, he confirmed. And do you know who wrote it? Sarutobi questioned. The Tsuchikage, of course. The councilman had the vague sense that the Hokage was about to turn the tables on him, but for the life of him he couldn't fathom how the professor intended to do it. Well, nobody ever accused Satoru of being a genius. And who is the Tsuchikage to us? The third questioned further. He's the leader of Iwagakure. The councilman was losing the ground under his feet and he didn't have a clue how it had happened. I probably didn't make myself clear, Sarutobi said. I meant what is his relation to us? What do you mean? Satoru was befuddled and many of the civilians along with him. The shrewd ones were catching on. I mean, is he our friend or not? The third rephrased his question. The answer was easy. In their history, Iwa and Konoha were almost constantly on each other's throats. Even Satoru knew it and therefore his answer was, no. Exactly. The Hokage smiled. And tell me now, Satoru-san, is it wise to believe everything an enemy says? No, he reluctantly admitted. Then why were you so ready to believe this? The elderly village leader raised his eyebrow. Because it's that. He didn't finish. Sarutobi's glare stopped him. It's what? Sandaime asked quietly. Nothing, the councilman said. Just forget it. I will for now, the old Kage agreed, but there was an unspoken threat in his voice. Now is there anything else you wanted? Even if this isn't true, Hyuga Hayashi started, can't we prevent the war that way anyway? Unlikely, the Hokage answered. He's just trying to make us discard our strongest weapon. Tenzo joined the conversation. It was one of the few times Sarutobi actually agreed with him. Precisely, he nodded. This isn't a missive of peace, but an attempt to strike a blow to us before the fighting starts. We can't be sure of that, the Hyuga clan head continued. He was remembering his brother. Such move worked once before. It was a completely different situation, the Hokage pointed out. Our strength was dwindled and we couldn't have afforded a war back then. Can we now? The white-eyed man asked. We suffered blows to our strength recently. Even if there was never any love lost between the Hyuga and the Uchiha, Hayashi was now missing them dearly. The choice isn't ours, the Sandaime cited. The war already all but started. There is one more matter to address today, Kurama Unkai, the newly instated clan head stated. We heard that boy used its power in great amount recently. It's true, Sarutobi confirmed. He was fighting enemy Jinchuriki, so it was entirely warranted. And what about the match with the Tsuchikage's grandson? Unkai prodded. The power emerges whenever his life is in peril, the professor explained. In that particular instance, he was severely wounded. How can we be sure it won't happen again and without provocation? The Kurama wanted to know. And before you start defending his character, how can you be sure he has control over it? Such things cannot be controlled. His eyes gained a faraway look. He was remembering the horrendous end of his brother and his wife and the curse waiting within their only child. It doesn't really matter as long as it happens near enemy positions, Koharu interrupted. I guess you're right, Unkai admitted, but I'm still worried. That's understandable, Hamura added his 2 bits, but think about how many enemy soldiers you wouldn't have to worry about with such power at our side. That's one way to look at it, the Kurama replied. Anyway, Sarutobi said, is there anything else you wish to discuss? Nobody spoke. Well then, the meeting is concluded. And one last thing. Don't speak about the contents of the letter to anyone. Little did the Hokage know that the damage was already done. Every council member had already shown the message to their aides, families and friends, and before the meeting ended, half of Konoha had heard about it. Sunagakure, watch it, sis, I'm finally ninja like you. Kankuro boasted his brand new shiny Hitai 8. And I graduated younger than you. Take that. Idiot. She smacked him on the head. Ah, sis, what was that for? The younger of the siblings whined, rubbing the sore spot on his head. For being an idiot, Temari explained. Do you really think they let you graduate for being so awesome? Kankuro's look answered that yes, he indeed did. Thankfully he had enough common sense not to say it aloud. His sister scowled anyway. In case you hadn't noticed yet, the fan wielder continued, there's a war about to break out. We need to boost our shinobi ranks, even if it means letting simpletons like you graduate. Do you have to spoil every fun? The young puppeteer pouted. Of course I know there's going to be a war. But you can't seriously mean we'll get sent to the front lines right off the bat. Anyway, who do you think I'm going to be teamed up with? She shrugged. How would I know? Before anything else could be said, the door opened and Baki entered. They both were surprised at what Gaara's caretaker was doing there until they saw their youngest brother walking behind him. They both tensed. Even Temari, who had resolved to be nice to him, couldn't forget the sight of unleashed Shikaku during the banquet battle, as it was commonly known now. So you're both here. Good, Baki stated. Before they could answer, he continued. Because of the recent additions to our ninja ranks, Kazekage-sama decided to reorganize the team so that everyone would have at least one experienced shinobi. The kunoichi got a sinking feeling about this. She would hardly call herself experienced, but she still had served longer than any of her brothers. And because the three of you get along so well, here Kankuro snorted, Kazekage-sama decided that you would be put on a team together. What? The middle one of the siblings yelped. Quiet, his sister hissed, hitting him. You heard me. You three are now a team and I'm your new sensei. And because you're such a strong team, Baki added, you wouldn't have to be bothered with low-rank missions. Kankuro perked up, Temari blanched. Does that mean, she started slowly, that we'd get sent right on the battlefield? Now Kankuro paled as well. Not right now, their new sensei answered. You'll be allowed to gain some experience on C and B-ranked missions first. Somehow that didn't reassure me at all, the wind user muttered. Don't be so down. Baki attempted a smile but failed. You're strong. You'll get through it. I don't worry about this, the kunoichi corrected. I'm more concerned about what comes afterwards. That, now Baki smiled for real, is the mark of a good ninja. The compliment went utterly unappreciated. Training grounds Tenzo wasn't surprised to find his charge training. What interested him more was what Naruto was doing. There were multiple clones of the young blonde standing around. That in itself wasn't strange, his charge used them in training quite often. Stranger was what they were doing. Some of them held leaves in their hands and were trying to set them afire. That wasn't strange either. Naruto had attempted to gain the fire element before and it finally looked like he was getting close. What was really curious was the behavior of the other ones. They were staring at their hands, like they were trying to divine the future from them. The Jounin had no idea what they were working on, but he could feel the chakra being discharged. What are you doing? He asked. Working on something new, the boy answered. So I gathered, his caretaker replied. But what is it supposed to be? I haven't thought up a good name for it yet, the blonde shrugged. What is it supposed to do? The former ANBU rephrased his question. I got an idea in Suna, he explained. I can make wind blades, but they can cut only so deep. Eventually they are stopped because my hand is stopped. He looked at the Jounin questioningly. Tenzo indicated he understood. Naruto continued. So I thought about making something that wouldn't be stopped so easily. Something like a drill. It goes forward and it doesn't stop. I think I get it, Tenzo nodded slowly. It even reminds me of something. But isn't that very hard? Well, the demon vessel shrugged, so far I had little success. But I will get it right, you'll see. I don't doubt it, the man smiled. Anyway, you said it reminded you of something. Can you remember what? It might help. Sorry, he shook his head, I can't remember. Too bad, the blonde sighed. Never mind, I'll figure it out anyway. He created a shadow clone and it ran away. Where did he go? The Jounin raised an eyebrow. To the library, duh. The child looked at him like it should be obvious to everybody. Of course. And before I forget, we've been called to the Hokage Tower. Why didn't you say it before? Naruto jumped and moved to run. Relax, Tenzo caught his arm. We have almost an hour before we have to be there. The boy quieted down a bit. What are we called for? He wanted to know. Well, the man smiled enigmatically, that's a secret. Streets of Konoha. Ever since Naruto became genin, the hateful looks following him everywhere toned down a bit. But now they were back with vengeance. Naruto was taken aback and unconsciously stepped closer to Tenzo. He was trying to pretend he didn't see them, but it was hard. People were whispering, all around him. His sensitive ears picked snippets of their conversations, even when he wasn't trying. That's him. How dare he? Like he owned it here. Knew he was no good. It had to happen eventually. Should have killed him when. Shame they allow him to walk around just like that. But it won't be long now. What could have caused such reactions? Neither Naruto nor Tenzo knew, though it seemed they would find out soon. Two people stood in front of them, especially hateful sneers on their faces. Their white eyes marked them as Hyuga and their covered foreheads meant they were from the branch house. They looked alike, both tall and 30-ish, with long black hair. The most noticeable difference was that one was male and the other female, at least their clothes suggested that. The female spat on Naruto's feet as they were passing by. The blonde wanted to simply ignore it, but Tenzo couldn't. What was that supposed to mean? He barked at the perpetrator. You need to ask, she shot back. How dare he just walk around like that, her companion added. I don't know what your problem is, the Jounin started, but you'll step aside this moment. We were summoned before the Hokage. Do you want to be the reason we're late? I'm sure he would be very understanding that you felt the need to delay us and keep him waiting. Why didn't you say so? The woman smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. We don't want you to be late. Especially if he'll finally do what he should have done a long time ago. The two Hyuga disappeared in the crowd. What was that about? Naruto asked. Probably the usual, Tenzo shrugged. I don't think so, the blonde shook his head. This was much worse. You're right, the man sighed. Something got into them today. Hopefully they'd get over it soon. Yes. Let's hope they do. But he couldn't shake a feeling of foreboding. Hokage Tower. When they reached the tower, Naruto was only mildly surprised to meet both his teammates there. He smiled in greeting. The bad feelings from their journey there immediately disappearing. Hello. Do you know what are we here for? No, Hataru shook her head, he wouldn't tell us. You're going to find out soon enough, their sensei assured them. It better be good, Hana grumbled. I was in the middle of a torture. I mean training session with Kiba. Oh, it would be. Before the wood user could say anything else, the Sandame's secretary stuck her head into the room. Hokage-sama will see you now, she announced. They followed her into the office. Sarutobi was sitting behind the table, puffing his pipe. Thank you all for coming, the old man began. There is usually a bigger ceremony, but everything is so busy lately, so we'll make it quick. You already know how you did in the Chunin exams, so now is the time to make it official. Congratulations, you are now Chunin of Konohagakure. Here are your vests. He reached under his desk and handed them 3 flak jackets. Naruto's face broke into a huge grin. Thank you, old man, you're the best. Whoever taught you manners, Tiny? Hana scolded, but she was smiling as well. I'm glad to see you're all so happy, but we still have to clear some things out, Sarutobi interrupted their antics. First, here's the paperwork for your new rank. Naruto muttered something under his breath. It sounded suspiciously like, you sure know how to spoil our fun. You have to fill it and hand it to the Shinobi registration office tomorrow, the Sandaime continued. Next. Chunin teams are usually organized differently than Genin teams, but because you're still fresh, you'll stay together under the command of Tenzo for the time being. Great, Naruto smiled. He couldn't imagine what it would be like to be without his guardian. What's not so great is that as Chunin, the Hokage spoke. You will take part in the war once it starts. I don't like sending freshly promoted Chunin out there, so you'll start as backup, but you'll be seeing the battlefield before you know it. He paused for a moment to let his words sink in. If you don't have any questions, you are dismissed. Since nobody had anything to say, they filed out of the office. Once outside, they immediately tried their new vests on. It clashes with my skirt, Hataru complained. Really, the combination of khaki green and dark purple wasn't overly appealing. Too bad for you, Hana smirked. She simply exchanged her leather jacket for the official Chunin one. It looked good on her. It's just a bit too tight. Too tight? Try 3 sizes too big, Naruto grumbled. The girls looked at him and had to stifle giggles. Oh, Hataru laughed, you look like you might get lost in it. Yes, Hana agreed, you'd fit into it 2 times. That's not funny, the boy scowled. How am I supposed to fight if that thing keeps getting into my way? You don't have to wear it all the time, the purple-haired girl reminded him. Many Chunin and Jounin don't. Then how would people tell I'm a Chunin, the blonde objected. That's true, Hana pointed out. Most have trouble believing he could be a Genin. He'll just have one custom-made, Tenzo interrupted. That would be great, the youngest of the group agreed. Hey, do you think I should wear the official uniform too? You know, to look more official? If you want to, the Jounin shrugged. It's probably a wasted effort, Hana jibed. You aren't going to look official no matter what you wear. Hey! Cut it out, we should be going, Tenzo ordered. They walked out of the tower, still admiring their new attires. On the front steps they paused. There was a crowd gathered in the square and they looked at them none too friendly. Both Naruto and Tenzo immediately recognized the 2 Hyuga they had encountered earlier in the forefront. Thinking of it, there were quite a lot of Hyuga in the crowd. Do you think we can get through? Naruto whispered. He had to admit he was scared. Not even before Tenzo took him in he had to face a crowd that angry. The worst incidents were always with individuals, usually drunken ones. But here gathered hundreds of people and they all looked perfectly sober. What could have gotten into them? Then the female Hyuga from earlier stepped forward and he got the sinking feeling he was about to find out soon and not going to like it a bit. You're still free? The woman screeched. And looks like they made him Chunin, her brother, probably, spat. And he walks around just like that, somebody from the crowd added. Hey you! How dare you show your face here? And why shouldn't he? Tenzo retorted. Naruto cringed. His experiences with mobs told him this wasn't a smart thing to say. Why? The Hyuga woman screeched. Why he asks. You know why. It's all his fault. What is? Naruto asked. Somehow it didn't seem they were talking about the Kyubi. Don't try to look innocent, she spat. We knew you were no good and now you finally proved it. They definitely weren't talking about the fox. But what else? Naruto couldn't recall doing anything that would warrant such a reaction. We let you live here and that's how you repay us? By trying to destroy us? The blonde wished he had a clue what was this all about. Whatever has gotten into you? Tenzo shouted. Like you don't know. That little bastard brought a war on us. What? Naruto couldn't believe his ears. Yes. Why did you have to kill the Tsuchikige's son? I didn't. His exclamation was completely ignored by the angry gathering. Now he's going to wage war on us. People will die because of you. Unless we send you to him. Yes. Kill him and send him to IWA in pieces. That will save us. Somebody threw a stone. It went wide, but it was soon followed by others. Team Tenzo had a hard time to dodge them all. Some of the people throwing them had to be shinobi. The mob moved forward. Back to the tower, the Jounin ordered. The three Chunin obeyed immediately. Close the door, he shouted at the guards at the door. They were already moving. They didn't want to have an angry crowd inside. What's going on here? Sarutobi's voice boomed through the entrance hall. That demon is running away, shouted somebody from the mob. Silence. The Hokage looked furious. And because he underlined his words with a liberal dose of killing intent, the crowd actually obeyed. The Sandaime marched towards them, his robes bellowing behind him. For a moment, he truly looked like the god of shinobi. The people in the first rows tried to back off, but they found they had nowhere to go. What, the third spoke in a dangerously low tone, do you think you are doing? Trying to stop a war, one of the bravest explained. Sarutobi inwardly groaned. He had known the outrageous request would mean trouble the moment he had first landed his eyes on it. He definitely had to find whoever had released it and send him on a lengthy vacation with Ibiki. Outwardly he gave no sign of what he was thinking. He only scowled deeper. And whatever makes you think that murdering a child would help? He murdered the Tsuchikige's son. The professor replied by intensifying his killing intent. Many people in the crowd paled. Those on its outskirts were trying to get away stealthily. Good. Soon only the core would remain. And who told you that? I was there and saw everything. And he didn't do such thing. Hizashi did nothing as well, spat the Hyuga branch house woman. Ah. So that was the crux of the matter. Why does he get to live when he didn't? She sounded almost hysterical. Sarutobi frowned. This had to be handled carefully. The problem is, he began softly, that there is no way to stop the war now. Do you know how many important people died during the battle at the banquet? The daimyos are vying for blood and vengeance and they wouldn't stop until they have it. And unlike you, neither of them believes it is Naruto's fault. Our own daimyo blames IWA for the death of his favorite cousin. Even if you actually managed to appease the Tsuchikage, we would still have to go to war. And in war, we have to be united. Can't you see that your actions are aiding our enemies? Can't you see that you're doing precisely what the Tsuchikage wanted you to do, sow discord in our own ranks? Be ashamed of yourself. The crowd thinned to barely a half before he finished his speech. It looked like the whole Hyuga branch house was there. They were glaring daggers, but they didn't dare to say anything in the face of the Hokage's wrath. Most of them also saw the truth in his words, though it did little to quell their anger. Now, Sarutobi spoke again, go home. And don't repeat this foolishness ever again. With those words he walked back into the tower and slammed the door behind him. They should leave soon, he addressed the shaken Team Tenzo. Stay here until they do. Nobody even thought of disobeying. What was that all about? Asked the Mokuton wielder. And who is Hizashi? Konoha Main Library. Naruto's clone had spent almost all afternoon researching. The library was open to all ninja and it contained various kinds of information. What it didn't have were jutsu scrolls. They were kept in better guarded locations for security reasons and whoever wanted to study them had to have clearance of the same level as the technique in question. The librarians could bar anyone from entering those if he seemed suspicious to them. Needless to say, they usually found Naruto a plenty suspicious character, so he often had to bring Tenzo with him, if he wanted to see them. So what did he visit the library for? It was the books about techniques he was studying. Those books included the names, rank and general descriptions of jutsu without giving any instructions on performing them. And these were what Naruto was interested in. He looked for anything named wind drill, chakra drill or just drill. There was nothing. After some consideration he studied techniques named piercing anything, but neither Inuzuka's piercing fang, demonic illusion, piercing darkness or Raitun, piercing lightning sometimes used by Kyumo ninja sounded remotely helpful. He sat back and closed the book in dismay. Either the technique Tenzo spoke about wasn't here, or it had such a strange name he would never guess it. But he wasn't one to give up. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine how his finished technique should look like. He imagined his hand enveloped in a whirlwind of extremely sharp blades. Then he opened his eyes and looked up anything with whirlwind in its name. This search yielded a couple of taijutsu moves and a futon jutsu he had heard of before, but it wasn't what he needed. He then looked up whirlpool, eddy, tornado, hurricane, whirl, whirling, maelstrom, storm, spin, spinning and spiral. His main discovery was that circular motion wasn't popular among jutsu creators. There was hardly anything. He was almost ready to call it a day when he finally hit gold. One book spoke of something that finally sounded useful. Rasengan A rank. N created by Yondaime Hokage. Uses concentrated ball of spinning chakra to drill through almost anything. And that was all there was. Naruto's clone was sure he had found the technique Tenzo was talking about. But how to find out more about it? A rank was high above his clearance. Tenzo, as a jounin, would be allowed to see it, but there was the letter N beside the rank. That meant the scroll was not available in the library. Probably because this might be one of those that were accessible only to a select few, like a clan or whoever the creator had deemed worthy. That is if the Yondaime didn't take it to his grave, which was also a possibility. He closed the book and looked for another mentions of the Rasengan. He was sure there must be something in the life of the Yondaime, history of the Third Great Shinobi War or something like that. Maybe it would yield some more hints. Konoha Ninja Academy. The classroom was in its usual unruly state that occurred every time no teacher was present. It wasn't usual for Iruka-sensei to be late, but the whole class was taking advantage of his absence. In the front, Sakura, Ino, Ami, Fuki and Kasumi were fawning over Sasuke. The last Uchiha was ignoring them with all his considerable might. Thanks to lots of practice he could now ignore fangirls with perfect professionalism. In the back Kiba was showing off his brand new puppy, I mean a ninja dog, never to be confused with a puppy, no matter that he's still young. This is Akamaru, he introduced the little white ball of fur to his friends. He's cute, Choji cooed. Akamaru barked. He was a big bad ninken of the big, bad Inuzuka clan. He didn't appreciate being called cute. Hey, Shikamaru, what do you think? The Nara genius didn't think anything. He was sleeping soundly. Kiba jabbed him with his elbow. The lazy boy opened one eye. Troublesome, he yawned. What do you want now? That's Akamaru, Kiba introduced his partner again. Troublesome. Hello, said Shikamaru and closed his eyes again. Akamaru barked happily. At least somebody was taking him seriously. Hey, Kiba, Choji said, taking a bag of chips out of his bag. Why do you call him Red? Why not? The Inuzuka still had no idea either, but he would never admit it. Because he's white, the plump boy replied, opening his bag of chips. Akamaru's nose twitched. Barbecue. He whined unhappily. Choji, seeing this, gave him a handful of chips, though it pained him greatly to sacrifice his favorite flavor. The puppy devoured them hastily. So what? Kiba shrugged. Well, nothing. Choji ran out of arguments. He was never particularly good with them. He concentrated on eating his chips before Akamaru could stick his snout into the bag. The fluffy dog was trying valiantly. Before anything else cloud happened, the door opened and Iruka walked in. He looked grim, but that might have something to do with their performance on the latest test. He was supposed to announce the results today. The students quieted down, but not enough in their sensei's opinion. "Silence," he commanded. Everybody stopped talking and returned to their seats. Only Ino and Sakura had a brief shouting match over who would sit next to her Sasuke-kun. Irika stopped it by sending both of them to the other end of the classroom. Now the order was restored. He stood at the front of the classroom. "Students, I have an important announcement to make today." His voice was grave and serious, and many children wondered whether they really did so badly on the last test. "Shikamaru! Wake up," he shouted. The lazy genius lifted his head from his arms and blinked owlishly. "Now everybody is awake, we can continue." Irika's voice turned grave once more. "Some of you might have already heard of what happened during the last Chunin exams in Suna." Kiba paled. He knew what Irika-sensei was going to say next. He had heard speculations before, but now it was going to become official. "What's wrong, Kiba?" Choji asked. "Weren't you there?" Shikamaru added. "I was," he admitted. He didn't tell his classmates about what he had witnessed there. He didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to even think about it. Remembering the feeling of the tainted power in the air made him shake every time. The only thing he described to his friends were the final matches. "Quiet," Irika chastised them. "This is really important, so pay attention." They all straightened up, the perfect pictures of innocence. Irika wasn't fooled, he knew them too well for that, but since they were all silent, he continued. "So because of the events that occurred there, we'll probably be soon at war with IWA. Now, there was it. There were startled and frightened gasps from all over the classroom. Even the usually stoic Sasuke blinked and Shino's bugs buzzed louder. Kiba only stared straight ahead. Shikamaru didn't miss it. "You knew, didn't you?" Kiba nodded mutely. "War? What? That's troublesome," sounded from various parts of the classroom. "Quiet down," Irika ordered. They obeyed immediately. The Chunin wished they could be so disciplined all the time, and not only when faced with such a great danger. He let his eyes wander over them. They were only children. Frightened young children. He couldn't imagine them going to battle, not even his best students, but he knew they will have to. He had been too young to take part in the last war, but he had some idea what it was like. He didn't wish it on anyone. Because there is a war looming ahead, the Hokage decided to put the academy on wartime regime. His words resounded ominously through the silent classroom. "What does it mean?" Haruno Sakura. A clever girl. But too smitten with Uchiha Sasuke. He didn't give her high chances of survival. "That means that the curriculum will be sped up and the graduation age lowered," he explained. "You were supposed to spend 4 years learning here, but in wartime it will be reduced to 2. So that means by the end of the next school year you should be graduating." "So soon?" "Yes, Kuta, so soon," the Chunin confirmed. "To accomplish that, your taijutsu, ninjutsu, genjutsu and thrown weapon training would be intensified. The tactics, strategy and stealth classes would remain as they are. The history lessons are cut down and the kunoichi training is cancelled entirely." "What?" Every girl in class shouted in unison. "Yes, Ino," he turned to the loudest one. "Such skills aren't important in wartime. But aren't we supposed to be able to pretend to be civilian women?" The petite blonde turned her wide blue eyes on him. It usually made people do whatever she wanted, but it would have little to no effect on an enemy. "Such skill is meaningless on the battlefield, Miss Yamanaka," he informed her. "Or do you intend to kill your opponent by your superior flower arranging skills? Though I suppose you might be able to do so with your cooking." The prankster in him sometimes needed out. Nobody laughed. I bet it would be no problem for Sasuke-kun. Sakura again. It was just a matter of time when somebody would say that. Yes, he'll do it, no problem, Ami agreed. He's a genius after all, Ino added. She must have been really distracted to react so late. Soon other members of the fan club voiced their opinions, while Sasuke didn't give any outward sign he heard them at all. Were they really so shallow, or were they striving for a sense of normalcy in the face of upcoming disaster? Irika didn't know. He wasn't sure he wanted to. Quiet down, he shouted using his big head no jutsu. The class obeyed immediately. The situation is grave, so there is no time for your childish squabbles. He reached into a folder and withdrew a stack of papers. These are your new schedules. They become effective starting today. Pass them along and I'll answer any questions you might have concerning them. Sasuke studied his sheet with interest. More training. Good. More power for him. And a war promised a lot of opportunities to test himself against worthy opponents. He'll become strong in no time. And then. Watch out, Itachi, I'll be coming for you. Just don't get yourself killed before I can get you. Hinata studied her new curriculum with a sense of impending doom. She was already weak and useless, and it will become even more apparent with the new more intensive training. She couldn't imagine herself going to war. She was going to get killed in the first battle. She'd probably get even her teammates killed. She wondered whether anybody would miss her. She didn't think her father would be such a person. He already had Hanabi, and though her younger sister was barely more than a toddler, everybody agreed she showed more promise than Hinata ever did. The Hyuga heiress sighed. She wished she weren't such a pathetic failure. No matter how hard she tried, she could never become strong. No matter what she did, it was never enough. Maybe she wouldn't be able to graduate at all and will stay in Konoha, as a branch house member. She shuddered. She really didn't want that. She will try her hardest to graduate. If only because death in battle didn't sound as bad as an activated caged bird seal. Shino considered the new timetable with outward indifference. Only the buzzing of his Kikaichu betrayed what he was really feeling. His clan prided themselves on their calm and logical approach to anything, but he was finding it impossible to do so now. Logic was telling him that he wasn't good enough to fight in the war. Most, if not all, his classmates weren't. Logic concluded that they would be dead soon after graduation. And even if the Aburame wasn't particularly close to any of them, he didn't want their deaths. He didn't want to die as well. He was scared, and that wasn't becoming of a shinobi. He stared blankly ahead and tried to calm himself. He'll need his composure if he wanted to survive. And he wished he didn't have to be calm and logical and could run screaming. Troublesome, was on the forefront of Shikamaru's mind. He had always wanted to be average, but it looked like it wasn't an option anymore. Average shinobi had the average life expectancy on battlefield uncomfortably low. He was too lazy to look up a statistic, but he sure wanted to live longer than that. That meant he'd have to train and become good enough to survive. But not too good, or he'll get sent to the worst battles. He'd have to make sure nobody had any idea how good he really was. Troublesome. Choji was munching on his chips faster than ever. It was his nervous habit, and he had a lot of reasons for anxiety now. He was sure his friend Shikamaru would be all right. He was smart and all, but what about him? He was strong, but that was about it. He even couldn't use the multi-size technique yet. If he had to go and fight now. That sucks for you, Shinta whispered into his ear. You're too slow to dodge anything. Choji scowled. He disliked Shinta. The boy was picking on him all the time, making fun of his pleasantly plump body. But he didn't really hate him. He was even a bit thankful to him. His taunts were part of the reason Shikamaru became his friend. Leave him alone, Kiba growled. Shouldn't you be worried about yourself? Shikamaru added. Why do you defend him? Tobio, Shinta's friend, asked. He'll only drag everybody down. Though you really can't be dragged any lower, Shinta added. You two are too troublesome to bother answering, the Nara decided, turning back. Don't mind them, Choji. They aren't worth getting worked up over. I only hope we won't end up on the same team with either of you, Shinta scoffed. Likewise, Shikamaru muttered before falling asleep. Sakura was scared. She was the smartest girl in the class and she knew it, but her taijutsu wasn't anything special and she knew it as well. And being as smart as she was, she could make a fair guess about her chances of survival. What she came up with wasn't pretty. She desperately needed some comfort, but she had no friends in the class. She had broken up with Ino over their developing rivalry over Sasuke. She looked at her former friend turned rival desperately, searching her face for any sign they might become friends again. Ino felt unsure of herself. She was one of the better kunoichi in class, but she had also heard loads of war stories from her father and his teammates, whenever they came to visit. She was confident of her ability to hit anything with a shuriken, but that wasn't enough. She barely started learning her clan's secret techniques and she could tell it would be a long time before she became proficient with them. She felt herself rapidly falling into depression and that just wouldn't do. She needed a confidence boost now and she spotted the perfect target. Hey, billboard brow! She shouted. Aren't you afraid your humongous forehead makes a perfect target? No one can miss that, Ami added. She had resumed her old habit of bullying Sakura as soon as the Yamanaka heiress had stopped protecting her. Her lackeys Fuki and Kasumi nodded in agreement and sneered viciously. Sakura was crestfallen. So Ino didn't want to rekindle their old friendship. Show her up. Inner Sakura shouted. And what about you, Ino pig? She retorted, looking perfectly self-confident, despite feeling the complete opposite. You should be careful or somebody would mistake you for an actual pig and eat you for dinner. Watch it, forehead girl. Ino snarled. Quiet. Irika halted their fight. I said you might ask me questions, not argue among yourselves. In case you've forgotten, you are all on the same side here. All of you are shinobi of Konohagakure. You are expected to be comrades, to watch each other's backs. Fighting among yourselves won't be tolerated. Understood? Only silence responded. Good. So now, if nobody has a question, we'll study the theory of multilayered traps. Konoha TNI headquarters Marino Ibiki rubbed his temples tiredly. He had recently ascended to the position of the head of his unit and was already marveling at how his predecessor had been able to deal with the workload. It was true that such cases didn't happen every day. If they did, the scarred Tokubetsu Jounin would hand in his resignation on the spot. This was the problem at hand, Discover, who had leaked the contents of the Tsuchikage's letter to the general populace. It had seemed easy at first, but was slowly proving itself more and more complicated. They had already interrogated all the staff that had access to the Hokage's trash bin and they determined that neither of them had taken the letter out. Not that they trusted them. So, but a thorough search of said bin revealed that the letter was still there. And if it was still there, how did it get into the hands of so many people? The only logical answer was that there were 2 copies of the accursed demand. And if there were indeed 2, where did the other one come from? The experts were already working on them and as far as they could tell, both the papers were really from IWA, written by the Tsuchikage and stamped with his official seal. It indicated that he meant for the missive to come out to general public, which, Ibiki had to admit, was a clever move. But the question of how the other letter got to the important people remained unanswered. The only way to resolve it was to ask the councilmen and clan heads who had shown them the thrice accursed piece of paper. It was something Ibiki really didn't want to do, but had no choice about. He dearly wished he could delegate it to his subordinates, but all the self-important politicians would refuse to speak with mere underlings. To make them talk, the boss had to come himself. The chief interrogator wished he could take his former boss and mentor to help, but Inoichi wasn't officially part of the squad anymore and he didn't have the necessary clearance. The Yamanaka could only offer him his moral support and condolences now. Ibiki sighed. It wasn't an experience he wanted to repeat ever again. He took a sip of tea and went over his notes on who told him what. On first glance, his current findings didn't look too encouraging. Every single esteemed council member claimed he was informed about it by another esteemed council member. So far everything seemed perfectly legal. It only meant that somebody was lying, refusing to tell on his real source of information. Even his extensive knowledge of human minds couldn't discern who it was. The Tokubetsu Jounin wished he could just drag them in for more serious interrogation, but they were influential people and unfortunately being an arrogant ass wasn't a punishable offense. He had to make do with another means. He wrote down all the names of the counselors and started drawing arrows between them, trying to track the progression of the letter among the populace. Due to the sheer number of names involved, the result looked chaotic, but Ibiki's trained mind traced the arrows without any difficulty. It should have been easy to find the person no arrow pointed to, but the problem was there wasn't any. Instead, all the arrows originated from a circle of 5 people, who insisted they got the message from each other. At least one of them was most certainly lying. It didn't say which, but at least it narrowed the search down considerably. Ibiki wasn't surprised at all when one of the suspects turned out to be Satoru, but he didn't think he was the culprit. The man wasn't cunning enough for something like this, unless he was the best actor he had ever encountered. No, the guilty party was only using him as a scapegoat, hiding in the shadows all the time. There was nothing to implicate them, but at least he had now an idea where to look for them. It would take weeks or maybe months of careful surveillance, but he would determine who had received the message from the Tsuchikage. He would find out who was secretly in the employ of IWA. Because if there was one thing Ibiki really hated, it was traitors. Training grounds. Naruto was training again. With the war looming on the horizon, or more likely much closer, it was important for him to get as good as he could in as little time as he could. He had read an unbelievable load of books looking for mentions of the Rasengan and was now fairly sure he knew as much as he could know about it without actually knowing how to perform it. He came to conclusion that it wasn't quite what he had in mind for his new technique. Sure, it was powerful, but it didn't work the way he wanted his new jutsu to work. For one thing, it didn't use elemental recomposition, at least from what he gathered. He wanted a wind technique. It was also very chakra intensive, which wasn't that much of a problem for Naruto, but he still wanted something he could use repeatedly. It also was held in the palm of the hand. He wanted something that would envelope his whole hand and maybe even forearm. The ability to drill through anything sounded cool, but it was a bit of an overkill. He didn't need to shred his opponent's arm to molecules, he only needed to inflict damage serious enough to make sure they wouldn't be using the appendage again. The high concentration of chakra was something he filed for later consideration. So he found himself on the training grounds again. Making wind blades presented no problem for him anymore, but he couldn't get them to spin properly. They tended to disintegrate whenever he attempted to do so. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. What was he doing wrong? Not enough chakra control? For him, it was the most likely reason. But what could help? He had already mastered everything Tenzo taught him. There was always the possibility of looking something up in the library, but Naruto never liked that and he had already spent an unholy amount of time there recently. That left only making something up. But what would help him with the circular motion? Well, moving something in a circle, obviously. But what? The leaf floating exercise was asking for it. What else? Maybe the water walking. He could stick his hand into the pond and make the water flow in circles around it. That sounded good. He divided his clones into 2 groups and set them on the task. Training again, a familiar voice asked. As you can see, Hataru, the blonde answered. So what are you working on? The purple-haired girl asked. And do I even want to know? The girl had changed her attire since she made Chunin. She originally didn't want to wear the flak jacket, claiming it wasn't fashionable, but Yugugo quickly convinced her that in battle there's no place for fashion, and the armored vest may someday save her life. So the younger Yuzuki relented and started wearing the green garment dutifully. She only changed her purple skirt for a black one, because black goes with everything. That didn't prevent her from occasionally complaining that the vest clashed with her hair. Developing a new technique, Naruto answered. It is going to be awesome, he boasted. That's it, he added in a subdued tone, if I can complete it. Why so down? Hataru asked. This isn't like you. It's nothing, the boy replied, but the kunoichi could tell he wasn't sincere. You know, Naruto, I think you should practice your lying as well, she commented. This was a lousy one. You're right, he sighed. So what's the problem? She prodded when the Jinchuriki offered no further explanation. Or is it secret? No, he shook his head, but I don't want to talk about it. Now, was there a reason you came? Oh, yes. She slapped her forehead. I almost forgot. There are briefings on wartime procedures for every Chunin who never were at war before. We are required to come. When? Now. Why didn't you say so earlier? He jumped to his feet. You continue your training, he commanded his clones and ran out of the training grounds. Hataru followed him. They slowed down when they reached the residential area. The young kunoichi noticed her teammate's shoulders sagging, his head drooping, his eyes fixed on the ground. Something is seriously wrong, she thought. It didn't take her long to discern what. All around them were people glaring, pointing at him, whispering hateful words. It was almost like before the crowd had tried to lynch him. So this is what has you so down, she whispered. He nodded mutely. Don't let them get to you, they're stupid. Naruto didn't answer. Hataru frowned. Don't tell me you actually believe them. The only response was his shoulders sagging further. Don't be stupid. That would be sinking to their level. The corner of Naruto's mouth twitched in a humorless smile. Don't you suggest we're beneath the demon, slut, a civilian woman shouted. Hataru glared at her. Leave it alone, Naruto said. I can't, she answered. If you won't defend yourself then I would. Don't get into trouble for me. I can handle it. Yeah. Don't side with the demon. This time it was a child who spoke. Hataru looked at him in surprise. Naruto only smirked. You see, somebody talked. Isn't that forbidden? The purple-haired kunoichi frowned. It is, the blonde confirmed, but do you want to execute half of Konoha? That bad? Her eyes widened. Yes, he nodded. And come now. We have a briefing to attend. Amigakure, the word traveled fast through the elemental nations. Soon everybody knew what had occurred in Suna. Sure, nobody knew exactly what had happened, though many people knew and made no secret of it. But no matter the quality of information a person received, there was one thing they were all certain about: there was going to be a war. And Hidden Rain was going to be caught in the middle, as usual. Hanzo Salamander was cursing the unfortunate geographical location of his country. With borders shared with 3 of the major shinobi nations, namely Wind, Earth and Fire, and some minor, like Grass, Bird and River, whenever those 3 so-called Great Ones decided to clash it inevitably happened in their territory. And war was going to happen, that much he knew. Sure, the nations would play at diplomacy for a while, pestering each other with outrageous requests, but that was just a front to make it look like it was someone else's fault and also to give them time to mobilize. This latest mess caught everybody unprepared. The old village leader smashed his fist into the table and watched the desk shatter with small satisfaction. This war couldn't have come at a worse time. Not too long after the Third Great Shinobi War had ended, a civil war broke out in their country. He didn't know who led the other party and he had punished many of his spies for their inadequacy. The only thing he knew for sure was that they claimed to want peace. Fools the lot of them. They were the ones who had started the war first place. He knew that many people didn't want his rule, but he was doing what was the best for AIM. He didn't want to see rampaging armies running amok through his country ever again. He had enough of it to last him for several lifetimes. He did his best to prevent it, and that was to make AIM strong enough that the Great Five would rather pick another battlefield. People complained that he impoverished them with his taxes and high military costs, but did they already forget that war was far worse? Couldn't they see he was trying to protect them? Apparently not. He ran a hand through his long white hair. He had to find a way out of this mess, but sadly nothing came to him. The only thing that was obvious was that he couldn't afford to wage war at two fronts. He wished he could just deal with the rebels swiftly, but they were hidden well. Well, it wasn't like he had a choice. He sat down to the spare desk in his room and started writing out orders. Send more scouts, deploy more troops, maybe raise the bounties for every rebel's head? Nah, their treasury was already almost empty. If he was religious, he would have prayed. But life had gotten such tendencies out of him a long time ago. He finished and stood up to hand the scrolls to his assistant. Then something made him pause. The silhouette of the jounin on guard around his office seemed different than before. Was the guard changing already over? He checked the clock. Nope, there still was almost an hour to go. So what then? His paranoia flared up. Could it be another assassination attempt by the rebels? They had tried it enough times to know it was futile. He sighed and silently created a water clone. He let it open the screen separating his office from the rest of the world while he himself hid behind the table. It proved to be a wise decision. The clone was destroyed by no less than 4 kunai with explosive tags the moment it stepped out of the room. Hanzo swore under his breath. There was water everywhere. The ink on his painfully done paperwork was dissolving in it and making blue splotches all over it. Didn't they have any consideration for hard effort? He'll have to work for a week overtime to catch up with the bureaucracy. The assassins would be coming down in an especially painful manner. They didn't wait for him to counterattack. Before he could think of the most painful way to send them off to the next world, the ceiling above him crumbled, sending huge pieces of rubble falling onto him. So they're good, he thought. Well, they had to be to dispose of my guards silently. All the better, I didn't have a really enjoyable fight in ages. He didn't even have to think about what he was doing. He created a shield above himself and at the same time sent a bunch in jumping out of his hiding place, acting like he was trying to escape from the downpour of rocks. Quite predictably it was hit with a hail of sunbon the moment it appeared. This alerted Hanzo to one of his opponent's positions. He threw a handful of kunai with explosive tags at him. There was no more need to be worrying about the documents lying in his office, they were ruined anyway. The man, wearing a scratched rain Hitai 8, like all the rebels did, jumped out of the way, exactly as the legendary ninja expected him to. Another set of explosive tags was already in the air, and those were his special secret design. They could move on their own and they homed in on humans. The little tags of paper stuck to the assassin's legs and refused to get off. Hanzo had no time to watch as they ignited. The man's companions were upon him in an instant. The Doton user who had brought the ceiling down on him used another jutsu to make spikes rise from the ground. The old shinobi pulled a quick kawarimi with one of his bookcases. Too bad for him that one of his attackers had expected this. He noticed a violent wave of water rushing towards him as soon as he materialized. But he didn't get to be an old shinobi without being really good. He was already moving before he could finish his thoughts. He jumped back, his hands flashing through seals. A wall of earth materialized between him and the attack, stopping the approaching wave harmlessly. His ears caught the sound of an explosion. It sounded like his first opponent was out of the game. The quiet swish of air being cut with a blade was nearly drowned in the crash. But Hanzo had survived countless battles by being able to pick up such little clues and act accordingly. He pivoted on his heel faster than most of the ninja were capable of, with a few exceptions. He blocked the approaching sword with his forearm guard. He never went anywhere without his full armor lately, and his precautions were paying off. The swordsman had barely enough time to blink in surprise when Hanzo's fist shot forward. The assassin was very good that he managed to raise his arm to his defense. Hanzo's armored fist only ripped through his sleeve and broke one of his bones. The old village leader didn't give his opponent a fraction of a second to recover and pressed on his attack. His right foot shot forward. The assassin jumped back to avoid it, but the kick was only a feint. A small pulse of chakra activated the Senbon launcher in the sole. The poison needles embedded themselves in the attacker's thigh. It would be only a matter of time before he was completely paralyzed. Hanzo didn't let his guard down. He could name dozens of shinobi for whom it was the last thing they ever did. He threw a kunai at his opponent. The man still had enough strength left to parry. Then a small rumble warned the white-haired ninja of somebody approaching. He leapt away, whirling around while still in the air, but he couldn't see anybody. Then he noticed a piece of rubble move. Meisai Gakuer no Jutsu, he recognized. That's Iwa's technique, and a highly treasured one. Are they from there? He filed the question for later. Idle musings during a fight were a sure way into an early grave. He threw another shower of kunai, forcing the masked assassin to reveal himself. A resounding clank made him know where a kunai was blocked. A series of hand seals was already finished by the time. He spat a jet of water, the stream forming into the shape of a serpent. It impacted with the masked shinobi head-on. The man was sent crashing into the nearest wall. He was only mildly surprised when he noticed 3 kunai with explosive tags flying towards him. So the swordsman wasn't down from the poison yet. He'll have to finish him off later. He switched with another bookcase. The kunai slammed into it, the activated tags blowing it into smithereens. The shockwave from the explosion finally sent the poisoned man to unconsciousness he wouldn't be waking from. It should be only 2 or 3 of them now. Piece of cake for Hanzo. This particular cake proved itself a bit hard to chew when the ground below him changed into a pair of giant hands trying to squash him. He jumped from the spot before they could do so. Another Iwa jutsu. It seems they indeed are from there. Does old Oenoki really think he can get rid of me so easily? He should have come himself to do so. He noticed a hail of kunai flying at him while he was still midair. He had no way of dodging. He quickly spat a stream of water, deflecting the deadly projectiles. He noticed the ground he was sailing to turning into mud. The office's floor was concrete. Crap, this is getting nasty. He bit his hand and formed 5 seals. A salamander materialized under him, small enough to fit into the room, big enough to swallow a man whole. Get him, Kanetsu, he commanded. The summon didn't need to be told twice. His tongue shot out of his mouth, tasting the air, searching for his masked target. He located him within a second. A jet of flame flew out of its mouth, hitting the man dead on. He barely had the time to scream before the superheated flames of the Salamander clan cooked him alive. His partner didn't seem a bit bothered by his teammate's gruesome fate. He used another earth jutsu to try and dispel the summoned creature. He didn't get enough time to finish his hand seals. The salamander's tongue shot out once more, hitting him square in the chest. The tongue stuck to him like glue, bringing him into the animal's mouth. One gulp and it was over for him. For Hanzo, it still wasn't time to relax. His finely honed senses told him there was still one more opponent. Kanetsu slowly turned his head. So there, Hanzo thought. He still couldn't see anything. It didn't surprise him anymore, he already knew his enemy knew the Meisai Gakuer. The soft flickering of Kanetsu's tongue let him know where exactly the man was. He launched 2 kunai at him and was rewarded with a hiss of pain when one of them found its mark. The assassin lost his concentration and became visible again. Restrain him, he commanded his summon. Kanetsu obliged and soon the man found himself bound with his elastic tongue. Hanzo watched the man carefully. It was the same one he had flung into the wall with his water serpent. How he was still moving after such hit was a mystery, but the aged village leader could tell he wouldn't be able to do so for much longer. Even now the man was bleeding profoundly. "Who sent you here?" he asked. No answer. Not that he expected one, but it never hurt to be polite. The man only stared at him with blank face. It was strange considering how much pain he had to be in. The man must have an extraordinary discipline. Hanzo ever saw such in very few shinobi. Answer, or the pain you're feeling now would be nothing compared to what I'll put you through. Once again, no reaction. The man only struggled some more. Then his body suddenly arched and after a moment he went limp. Hanzo sighed. He really wished to know who had sent them. They didn't seem like the regular run-of-the-mill rebels, but he wasn't entirely convinced they were IWA ninja either. Everything sure pointed that way, though not too obviously, but Hanzo was an old ninja and he didn't take anything at face value anymore. He started looking through the dead assassin's possessions. So far everything he found belonged to either AIM or IWA. He was almost convinced that they were indeed rock shinobi, when he noticed something about the swordsman he poisoned. His torn sleeve revealed a fresh cut and an old scar. A curved scar located between 2 prominent freckles. He realized where he had seen it before. Flashback: it happened during the last year of the Second Great Shinobi War. The warring parties were already exhausted and they would be seeking truce soon. Now was the time when the outcome would be decided. The efforts of years of struggle could be nullified by one word from a diplomat, by a few brushstrokes on paper. It was a difficult time, but also a time of great opportunity. And Hanzo was determined to take it. There was a small group of shinobi within his country, who were trying to gain peace. It sounded like a nice idea to Hanzo. If he was the one to lead the negotiations that would end the war, it would bring prestige and honor to him and his country. It was risky and prone to fail, but it was the best prospect he had. But he wasn't known as a negotiator or a peace activist, and he most likely wouldn't be believed if he called in for a peace conference. Everybody would think it was a trap. The initiative had to come from a more credible source, so he decided to bring the group in to help. It would be better to have them on his side than against him after all. Amigakure didn't need any more enemies than it already had. But almost as soon as he sent out the first message, he was approached with another prospect. Shimura Danzo of Konoha had offered him alliance for some services that would help Danzo. He read the message over and over. If it was true, it would secure the position of him and his country and it wouldn't put him in as much jeopardy as trying to settle it peacefully would. With a strong ally at their side, they would be with the winners and AIM would become a force to be reckoned with. But in this plan, there was no more place for the peace activists. Their movement would hinder his new plan and what would be worse, it would undermine his authority. Sorry, kiddies, you'll have to go. The plan was simple enough. He and his forces alongside with some of Danzo's would ambush the peace group where they were supposed to meet for negotiation. They would wipe them out with their superior numbers and skills and they would be done with it. Then they would proceed to strengthen their positions, mutually helping each other. For a while it seemed it would work out. They had successfully surrounded the much smaller group of children, and he had taken a blue-haired kunoichi friend of their leader hostage. They even convinced the leader, Yahiko, to commit suicide. How that fool ever believed he would let his girlfriend go he never understood. Well, idealists and their naivete. Though, in hindsight, maybe he had been the naive one. Then Tenzo gave an order to slaughter them all. What happened next still haunted him in his nightmares. The red-haired one had glared at him with Rinnegan eyes, something that wasn't supposed to exist outside of legends. Then he had summoned something, he had no better name for it. A spectral serpent had come out of its mouth, and whoever it touched had dropped dead. He had lost nearly 24 of his best jounin that day. It was a sore blow to Amagakure's strength. He himself had saved his life only through a quick escape. He wasted no time in searching out Tenzo. The one-eyed ANBU commander was running at top speed away from the disaster scene. And disaster it was for all parties involved. Hanzo quickly caught up with him. One of the two guards protecting him moved to intercept him. The salamander batted his arm away with a kunai. He was in no mood for pleasantries. Blood spewed from the man's arm, but he paid no heed to it. He and his partner moved to attack him again. "Stop," Tenzo commanded. "Well, what have you to say for yourself?" Hanzo growled. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Tenzo retorted. "What do you mean? This was your plan. And you provided the intel," the root commander pointed out calmly. "Why didn't you report their power?" "Because I had no idea," Hanzo thought, but refrained from saying it aloud. "Why did you insist on killing them all after their leader was dead? They would be harmless without him." "It's unwise to leave an enemy alive," Tenzo growled. "It's unwise to make needless enemies," he shot back. "Our world is full of enemies. You should know that." The Warhawk sounded like he was lecturing a stupid child. Hanzo didn't take such tone from anyone. "Of course I do," he spat. "But for you, there is nothing but enemies. You know what, Tenzo? Our deal is off. I don't want you to drag me into another disaster like this. You're making a mistake." His voice didn't even sound threatening when he said that, he was merely stating a fact. "Whatever," the white-haired man shrugged. "And now get out of my territory before I change my mind." Before the Konoha trio left, he got one good look at the arm he had cut earlier. End flashback. He was now looking at exactly the same arm, only the fresh wound had turned into a faded scar. There was no doubt, this was the same man that had been with Tenzo on that day, as he privately called it. If he didn't notice it, there would be no way for him to tell the men weren't from IWA. "So you wanted me to think that Tsuchikage wanted to get rid of me? You wanted me to side with you again? Like anything good ever came out of that?" He smiled grimly. "No, you old coot, no more. I'll teach you to mess with Senshuo no Hanzo." 3 days later AIM signed a treaty with IWA. Soon after that the war began in earnest. The first shinobi of Konoha to notice it was a team patrolling the border of AIM. They were doing their routine runs, still fresh after leaving the base, supposed to spend another 4 days in the perpetually rainy climate near the rain country. When they noticed the movement in the bamboo forest, they made the mistake of going to investigate. When they realized they encountered a superior force of IWA ninja, they were already surrounded. They put up a valiant fight, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. None of them escaped. The base near the border didn't get an advance warning. The rock ninja swarmed them like angry wasps. They managed to repel the first attack and send a message to Konoha, but eventually they were overpowered. Before the IWA forces could push any further, reinforcements from Konoha arrived and stopped them. The front lines were established. Near the front lines, because they were a newly promoted team of Chunin, they weren't sent to the battlefield right off the bat. They were even on the mission together with Tenzo-sensei. Their objective was simple: escort a convoy of provisions to a border fortress. Because of the importance of the delivery, there was another team of Chunin consisting of Hagane Kotetsu, Kamizuki Izumo and Akame Iwana with them. Their commander was the Tokubetsu Jounin Mitarashi Anko. Naruto was glad they were going on a mission with her. She was always fun to be with, though often in a creepy way, and since the war broke out she didn't show up as often as she used to do. Two of her subordinates, Izumo and Kotetsu, were good company as well. The third not so. His single eye was piercing Naruto with a particularly unfriendly glare. The blonde was used to it, more so after the Tsuchikage's letter, but he usually didn't have to stand one particular hateful person for so long. The tension this caused within their group was getting at everybody's nerves. In the end, Hana was the first one who decided to break it. They were currently traveling through an agricultural region, rice fields lining the road on both sides, no place to set an ambush anywhere in sight. It was a good area for a conversation. "Hey, Iwana, what is your problem?" "What do you mean?" the one-eyed Chunin retorted. "Why do you keep scowling at my teammate like that?" she clarified. "And why shouldn't I?" he shot back. "It's getting on my nerves," she explained. "And he is getting on mine," Iwana growled. "I can't stand to see him walking around like nothing happened." "And I can't stand to see you insult my teammate," the Inuzuka growled back. The Himura triplets growled with her. "Leave it alone," Naruto said. "I can't," the dog mistress refused. "No matter what you still think, the war isn't your fault." "Yes," the boy sighed, "you keep saying that. And we'll keep repeating it until you get it," Hataru added. "Say whatever you want, it's still that brat's fault," Iwana refused to change his opinion. "And you better not say anything," Tenzo interjected. "You're only disrupting our teamwork. Surely you don't want to be accused on sowing discord within the unit. Do you know what the penalty for doing it during wartime is?" The one-eyed man gulped. He knew it very well. "Or you might keep talking if you want," Anko added. "I'd actually prefer if you did. I haven't killed anybody in 8 days. My, the time is running by so fast." "Whole unit of freaks," Iwana muttered. "What was that?" the snake mistress asked all too sweetly. "Nothing." He put on his best innocent face. "I thought as much," she nodded. "Little Chunin like you shouldn't use such words around their betters." Iwana shot her a dirty glare, but said nothing. "Don't be so harsh at him," Izumo said. "He's probably just jealous that you're all so famous while he is not." "That sounds right," Kotetsu nodded. Everybody heard about Anko and Naruto, but who ever heard of some Akame Iwana? "I certainly didn't," the younger Chunin with bandana replied. "But Naruto, he will get far. So young and he already writes history." "That's quite a feat," his spiky-haired friend agreed. "What were we doing at his age? Flunking the academy?" Izumo offered. "No," Kotetsu shook his head, "that was a year later. Wasn't it when we blew up the janitor's closet with our homemade explosive tags?" "I thought those were smoke bombs," Izumo replied. "No, smoke bombs don't do so much damage," his partner disagreed. "That's what we thought. We wouldn't use them there anyway." "Wouldn't we?" Kotetsu raised an eyebrow. "Well, back then we probably would," Izumo admitted. "But we aren't like that anymore. We haven't blown up a closet in. How long was it?" "Last year," the man with the bandage over his nose supplied. "During the mission to Border Town." "Oh, that was quite something," Izumo smiled at the fond memory. "We shouldn't show our faces in there for at least another year. So as we said, we are good for causing small trouble, but we never did anything big. Starting a war, that's far outside our reach. Only a truly great character could accomplish that. By the time they finished, everybody's mood was brightened by the light, teasing tone of their bickering. Even Naruto was smiling. Iwana occasionally shot him a dark glance, but everybody ignored him. "You see it, Tiny? Your reputation is preceding you," Hana teased. "Would you please stop calling me Tiny?" the blonde scowled. "I'm a chunin now." "I'll stop calling you Tiny whenever you stop being the smallest on the team," the clan heiress retorted. Naruto scowled and then eyed his teammates. He reached barely to Hana's shoulders, and with Hataru it was even worse. Then his eyes landed on the Himura siblings. Despite their fast growth, they were still puppies. The Inuzuka noticed the direction of his glance. "No, Tiny, dogs don't count." The Himura barked. To an outside observer it sounded like they were complaining about being called insignificant, but the members of Team Tenzo knew better. The triplets detected enemies. The freshly promoted Chunin tensed. They tried to act like they noticed nothing, but they couldn't keep their hands from straying near their kunai pouches, their eyes from darting across the rice fields, searching for a place that could be concealing enemies. Enko noticed their sudden change of demeanor. "What's going on?" she asked in Konoha's secret sign language. Aloud she said, even they would outgrow him in a couple of years. The three canines barked happily. At least that was what it was supposed to sound as. In fact, they were reporting their findings about the enemy. "Enemy ahead," Hana signaled back. "Approximately 10 of them. Strength unknown." "You hear that, Tiny?" she teased. "Give them 2 or 3 years and they'll be like Kuramaru. So you'd better do some fast growing in the meantime, or they might mistake you for snack." "They'd rather not even try," he scowled at them dangerously. "I think I smell them as well." By that time everybody was aware of the danger and they were covertly shifting into battle positions. It didn't take long for them to reach the ambush site. Whoever made it marked it clearly by a huge puddle in the middle of an otherwise dry road. The members of the Konoha party had hard time not to scoff aloud. How could the enemy be so stupid? It turned out they weren't. While the Leaf teams were preparing for danger ahead, the real attack came from behind. Only those with finely honed chakra senses had an advance warning. When Tenzo shouted, "Duck," the massive wave was almost upon them. Naruto didn't waste a second to obey, but he was already too late. The wave slammed into him full force, pushed him to the ground, then some countercurrent lifted him up and dragged him somewhere to the fields. The young Chunin struggled to get to the surface, but the water didn't allow him. There was chakra in it, hindering his movement. He couldn't even use the bottom to stand up, his feet sunk deep into the mud. He tried for a kawarimi, but the enemy chakra around disrupted the flow of his own. "Crap, I have to do something or I'll drown here," he thought. Unfortunately, in all his training there was nothing that would prepare him for this situation. They had trained fighting underwater a bit, but never being held beyond the surface by a jutsu. He was about to panic, when he noticed a shadow moving towards him through the rice stalks. Enemy! He spun as fast as he could. It was just in time to redirect the man's kunai jab away from his torso. It was barely enough, but his flak jacket blocked the blade before it could reach his skin. He reached over his shoulder and took out his ninjato. Charging wind chakra into the blade was reflex now, but there was no air to form the sharpened extension. He swung his weapon at the enemy, but his movement was hindered by the water and the man evaded skillfully. Before he lost sight of him, Naruto got a glimpse of his breather. Even if he couldn't see his hitayate in the murky water, he was pretty sure he was facing a rain nin. The currents of the water shifted slightly. Naruto didn't need any more warning. He swung his sword over his shoulder. He was rewarded by the sound of escaping bubbles when the attacker let out a silent scream after Naruto's blade sliced into his biceps. It seemed that even underwater the wind chakra could sharpen edges. Naruto felt the chakra in the water around him dissipating. The pain must have broken the AIM ninja's concentration and he lost control of the technique. The blonde wasted no time in swimming to the surface. It surprised him how close it actually was. The jutsu must concentrate on making the surface solid, he theorized. He took a deep breath as soon as he could. He shook his head rapidly to get the water out of his eyes and took a moment to survey the situation. The carts from the supply caravan were randomly lying around, most of them overturned and dunked in the muddy water. The garrison isn't going to be happy, shot through his mind. He scrambled to the surface of the water and stood up. There was no way he was getting entangled within the rice stalks again. He barely straightened, when the rain shinobi sprung from the water, trying to pierce him through. Naruto took a desperate leap away. He almost made it. He received only a shallow cut on his thigh. The rain shinobi was upon him in an instant. Naruto barely managed to block his stab with his sword. He didn't even have the time to charge the blade with chakra again. The force behind the attack sent him skidding across the surface. The masked ninja pressed his attack. It looked like Naruto was in for a tough fight. Izumo managed to get a grip on one of the wagons. By some miracle, it didn't fall on top of him, he managed to stay on top when it overturned. The currents had pulled his bandana off his head, but he barely paid notice to it. He'd worry about his untamable hair later. He had more pressing concerns now, namely the fate of his friend. Kotetsu, he shouted. He didn't get an answer, well, not counting the kunai somebody threw at his back. He flattened himself against the surface and the projectile narrowly missed him. He threw a shuriken at the enemy, which was promptly blocked. Izumo quickly rolled to the other side of the cart, landing on the road. He never liked being a stationary target. Kotetsu, he cried again and again. He received no answer. He was beginning to worry. He could see only water everywhere and the occasional upturned wagons. Oh, and a couple of his peers fighting the attackers. But still no Kotetsu. His musings were cut short when a rain ninja suddenly sprung from the water in front of him. Izumo instinctively punched him in the face, but hit only his respirator. He hissed in pain. He nearly broke his fingers on the metal construction. The AIM nin didn't even flinch. He thrust with his kunai, trying to pierce a hole into Izumo's stomach. The Konoha Chunin twisted a bit and the blade slid on his flak jacket. He kicked with his right leg, trying to unbalance his opponent, but ended up losing his own footing on the slippery ground. He fell to his knees. The enemy was quick to capitalize on it, kneeing him in the face. Izumo crashed into the cart. He would be lucky if he didn't lose any teeth here. As the rain ninja lifted his leg to stomp on him, he had to correct his initial assessment. He would be lucky if he got out of here alive. Luck seemed to favor him that day. Just when the AIM shinobi's foot was about to connect, something cut into it from a side. The rain ninja screamed in pain. Izumo's eyes were fixed on the weapon that had just saved him. It was a very familiar giant, slightly curved kunai. Kotetsu, he exclaimed relieved. Never in his life he had been so happy to see his teammate. Sorry I took so long, his friend smiled back. The water had ripped the bandage from his face. I got a bit tangled in something. Doesn't matter as long as you're here, Izumo answered sincerely. No time for talking, Kotetsu interrupted, handing him the second giant kunai. We still have work here. It was true. The wounded AIM ninja had gone over the shock of the wound and was currently running through hand seals. Kotetsu had no intention of letting him finish. He rushed at him, weapon poised to strike. Izumo was only a step behind him. They were both too slow. The rain ninja finished his seals and the water rose between them, forming a wall. The wall then toppled, threatening to swipe them into the mud again. Izumo escaped via a kawarimi with a crate fallen out of one of the carts, appearing behind the enemy's back. Kotetsu was too slow. The wave sent him floating into the rice field. Izumo jumped at the rain ninja. He managed to catch him unawares. The man had registered movement out of the corner of his eye, but he was too slow to get out of the way. He managed to deflect the jab with his forearm guard, but the tip of the kunai sunk into his flak jacket, causing a shallow wound. Unfortunately, the weapon got stuck there. The wounded man was quick to capitalize on it. His uninjured arm shot out, catching Izumo in the face. Again. The Konoha Chunin absently thought he would have to do something about this pattern. The aim ninja scrambled to his feet, gripping a kunai in his hand, intent on finishing Izumo off. Before he could slash his weapon down, there was a flicker of movement and then the masked man collapsed to the ground, revealing the figure of Kotetsu, still holding the bloody giant kunai. "Why so down?" he snickered, cocking his head sideways. "Not really," Izumo replied with a smile. "Just laying back and admiring the scenery." "And you'd leave me to do everything by myself?" Kotetsu mock scolded. "Let's go," Izumo said, standing up. "The others are still fighting." "Of course," his teammate smirked. "What would they do without us?" Underwater Hana was completely disoriented. She knew she had to go up, but she couldn't tell which way it was. The wave had knocked her around so many times, that she completely lost her sense of direction. She tried to let out some bubbles and follow their ascent, but she couldn't see them in the muddy water. She kicked and trashed around wildly. She could feel the panic threatening to overwhelm her. "Calm down," she told herself. "You're a Chunin now. You can't afford to lose your cool now." But her self-discipline was running out along with her oxygen reserves. Then something slammed into her side. If she had any air left, she would have screamed. Now she only swiped her arm at the offending something, forgetting that there were only regular nails on her fingers now. Whatever was digging into her side remained unyielding. Suddenly she broke through the surface. She drew in a breath with the greedy desire of somebody who thought she wouldn't be doing it ever again. She shook the water from her eyes, much like her dogs would do. She took a brief look around. She realized that the thing that had pushed her upwards was a small tree. "Thanks," she coughed up to Tenzo-sensei. She swiftly disentangled herself from the branches and jumped onto the solid ground. Then something hit her. She couldn't see her dogs anywhere. "Haimaru," she shouted. Only one bark responded. Where were the other two? She whistled. The same dog that barked earlier answered with a pitiful whine. It didn't bode well. What had happened to her precious little Haimaru? She rushed to find out. "Hana!" Tenzo shouted a warning. She flung herself at the ground. A volley of shuriken flew over her head. That was close. Crap, she had to concentrate. She wouldn't be able to help anybody if she got herself stupidly killed. But it was so hard to stay calm when her partners were in danger. She spotted a handy crate and exchanged herself with it. It brought her closer to her sole responding dog. She quickly scrambled to her feet and ran to him. She found him behind an overturned crate, nudging the body of his brother with his nose. Hana wasted no time in removing the crate from the unlucky animal. One glance revealed to her that he was merely knocked out. She sighed in relief. But where was the third one? A sharp bark roused her from her musings. She instinctively rolled on the ground, avoiding the water spear aimed at her midsection. She immediately spotted her attacker. It wasn't hard, he wasn't even hiding. She reached into her pocket and took out one thoroughly soaked soldier pill. She threw it to her conscious dog. "Let's go," she commanded and activated her Shikyaku no Jutsu. Her fangs lengthened and her nails grew into claws. The dog turned into a perfect imitation of her. Getsuga. The rain ninja reacted quickly. Hana's furry tornado tore only through a crate he exchanged himself with. The Inuzuka stopped spinning, looking around for where her opponent was hiding. Usually her nose was enough to determine this, but now everything was drowned out by the stench of mud. Her copy gave a sharp bark. So there. She turned around, her fingers already flashing through seals. Katan, Gakakyu no Jutsu. Try dodging this. The aim ninja jumped into the water, escaping the deadly flames. Before Hana could swear, another spear of water rose against her, trying to impale her. She jumped sideways, but the spear pursued her. Her eyes darted left and right, searching for something to exchange herself with. Then her dog came to her assistance. He leapt at the spear from the side, disrupting the jutsu, but he was hit. He was flung sideways, his henge dispelling. No! Hana shouted. When she got her claws on the enemy, he was going to be so dead. Now how to find him underwater? Her eyes caught a hint of movement. She flung 2 kunai at it. It had no visible effect. Then a hail of shuriken was sailing towards her. She quickly ducked behind a crate. Her situation wasn't good. 2 of her dogs were down for the count, the third one was missing and she was fighting an enemy she couldn't see. Fortunately Tenzo's lectures covered this problem. She reached into her pocket and carefully withdrew 2 exploding notes. They were dripping wet, but still in working condition. She wrapped them around 2 kunai handles, mindful of their fragile state. Once finished, she jumped out of her hiding place. 2 kunai thrown her direction showed her where the enemy was hiding. She retaliated with her own, using her chakra to activate the tags. The throwing knives disappeared beyond the surface. Not a second after there was a bang and a huge geyser shot to the skies. Once it died down, the unconscious body of an AIM shinobi floated up. Hana smirked. That will teach you to mess with my dogs. Then her smile disappeared. She had yet to find the third one. Fields Hataru found herself entangled in something furry. Said something was moving frantically, scratching her. She fought to disentangle herself from it. Her feet found the bottom and she managed to stand up. She caught up some dirty water. She noticed something moving nearby. She instinctively whipped out a kunai, but then she realized it was one of Hana's dogs, though he was hard to recognize being completely soaked. She quickly jumped to the surface of water and helped the dog up as well. The Haimaru could walk on water, once they had learned it, which was a source of amazement to the purple-haired kunoichi. Hana assured her that it was quite normal among Inuzuka dogs. She took a quick look around. She found out that the wave had carried her far from the rest of their group. She couldn't see any enemy nearby. She decided it was a good thing. She also noticed her companions fighting, some of them being outnumbered. She realized she had to help them. She started running on the water surface, the dog keeping at her side. They covered barely a third of the distance, when the water in front of them suddenly surged, forming another wave and sending them underwater again. This is getting old, thought Hataru as she once again got entangled with the dog. She broke the surface to take a breath, but was immediately knocked back under by a foot to her head. Stars danced in front of her eyes and she inhaled a bit of water. She broke the surface soon enough and started coughing. From the corner of her eye she noticed some movement. It was her attacker again, but he didn't get to strike her second time. Hana's dog bit his ankle. The man screamed and tried to kick the canine off, but the teeth were deeply embedded in his flesh. Finally the bitten man remembered he was a ninja and took out a kunai, intending to stab the animal. Fortunately by the time Hataru could breathe again and joined the fight, the AIM nin was forced to block her vicious sword thrust. He managed it with little trouble and retaliated with a punch. The kunoichi tried to dodge, but it glanced her stomach anyway. She was forced to take a step back, desperately trying to catch her breath once again. Her opponent was extremely physically strong. It looked like she wouldn't be able to win with kenjutsu alone. But Kenjutsu battle was what she had to do now. The rain ninja finally managed to free his leg from the dog's jaws and attacked her with vengeance. Her kodachi stopped his kunai, but his kick landed on her thigh and upset her footing. His punch headed straight for her face, but she managed to dodge by a hair's breadth. She jumped back to gain some distance. She couldn't hold her own for much longer this way and she knew it. She wanted to try a jutsu, but her opponent wouldn't let her. He was upon her in an instant and once again she was forced to defend against a number of dangerous attacks. Little cuts and bruises began to appear on her body with an alarming rate. Just as she was about to give in to despair, a flurry of movement caught both hers and the opponent's eyes. The man leapt backwards and the furry tornado missed him by an inch. The Haimaru couldn't perform the tsuga to its full effect without the guidance of their mistress and without the aid of the soldier pills, but it had served its purpose. Hataru gained the brief reprieve needed to cast a jutsu. Her hands clasped together in a sequence of seals. The aim ninja was rushing at her again. She finished the last seal and thrust her arms forward. White lightning sprang forth from her fingers. She had to blink to protect her eyes from the bright white light. The shinobi jumped high to avoid it, but a couple of tendrils of the wide-range attack hit his legs anyway. The man hissed in pain. His legs refused to obey his command and he plunged straight into the water once he fell. Hataru was waiting for it, another lightning blast prepared on her fingertips. She fired it just as the man was attempting to get out of the water. Something slammed into her from behind. It made her lose control of her technique. The bolts of lightning went wide, only glancing her intended target. A painful yelp let her know that she had hit the dog instead. She looked over her shoulder. She spotted her opponent's form there, now dissolving into water. When did he have the time to create a clone without her knowing? It must have been when she had blinked earlier. Fortunately, even the aim ninja lost control of his jutsu after being electrocuted, otherwise she would have been dead now. She quickly scrambled to her feet. Her enemy was doing the same, and though his movements were a bit sluggish thanks to the hit, he was recovering quickly. The purple-haired kunoichi didn't dare to use another jutsu. The sight of Hana's dog struggling to remain afloat warned her of the danger of hitting her allies. She unsheathed her kodachi instead. And charged the blade with her lightning chakra. She rushed at the enemy. The man was standing as well, reaching into his pocket for more kunai. She had no intention to let him draw them. She slashed at his arm and when he dodged it, she followed with a kick aimed at his midsection. He turned to soften the blow and punched her. She found herself off balance, unable to evade completely. The hit sent her skidding across the water surface. She landed on her feet. The rain ninja was charging at her again. She sprang forward to meet him midway, but she lost her footing instead. The aim shinobi had sent a chakra pulse into the water to disrupt her water-walking technique. She barely had the time to widen her eyes in surprise before he bore down on her. Her instincts took over. She somehow managed to dodge his kick and slashed with her kodachi, releasing the chakra stored in the blade. A lightning bolt shot forth, catching the man in the thigh. The leg gave under him. Hataru quickly followed up with a stab just above his knee. Her blade was stopped by the bone. She smirked. He wouldn't be using the leg anytime soon again. In the next moment she found out the hard way that the man still had 3 perfectly usable limbs. A vicious kick hit her head and sent her underwater. She nearly lost the grip on her weapon. Once again stars erupted in front of her eyes. She expected another attack to follow up immediately, but nothing of that sort happened. When she got out of the water, she understood why. Hana's dog shook of the earlier shock and was now holding onto the aim ninja's left upper arm at such an angle that the man couldn't hit him. Not that he wasn't trying. The purple-haired kunoichi saw it as the perfect opportunity. Her opponent was clearly distracted. The blade of her kodachi once again crackled with lightning chakra. The rain ninja of course noticed that and turned towards her, but he couldn't do much with one of his legs injured and one arm restrained by a vicious canine. But even one arm was dangerous enough. The man extended it towards her, the sleeve slipping back, revealing that he had some sort of device concealed there. Hotaru couldn't tell what it was with just a glance, but she was sure she didn't want to find out. Last-ditch attacks in general tended to be nasty. Her eyes quickly searched for something to exchange herself with, but the area was empty. There was only water around. The device on the rain ninja's wrist shot forward a hail of small needles. Judging from the tint at their tips, they were probably poisoned. The senbon embedded themselves in Hotaru's body, which promptly dissolved into water. The man had just enough time to look surprised when a sword tip entered his right shoulder. The Raiton chakra that discharged from the blade into his body didn't help any. The electricity paralyzed him in short order. The girl then withdrew her sword and slashed at his neck. One hit severed both his jugular and his windpipe. The fight was over. Hotaru then picked the dog from where he was struggling in the water. Her latest attack had signed even him and he was obviously in pain. "It is going to be all right," she tried to assure him, petting his wet fur. The Ninken whined. Her attention was upsetting the slight burn from the lightning attack, completely obscured from Hotaru's view by his thick fur. "Let's go find your mistress now." On the road Anko was smiling. If there was something she truly enjoyed, it was a good battle. And good dango. Too bad she couldn't combine the two. Maybe she could try eating dango during a battle. And then stab her enemies with the sticks. She nimbly ducked the kunai sailing at her head and kicked the man trying to sneak up on her from behind in the stomach. Or maybe not. It could easily become her last dango, and Anko wanted to eat many sticks of dango in her life. And fight many battles. "What are you doing?" she shouted at Iwana, who was supposed to cover her back. The one-eyed man didn't answer. He was too busy blocking the kodachi of the man who had snuck up on him from his blind side. Anko threw a handful of kunai at him, forcing him to take a step back. "Do I have to do everything myself?" "Thanks," the chunin shouted. "Don't thank me and fight," the Tokubetsu jounin advised him. It was a good advice. For whatever reason, 4 of the AIM ninja targeted them. And neither of them was a slouch. The snake mistress was hard-pressed to keep the upper hand in the fight. She ducked low under a sword swipe and thrust her arm against the other enemy who was standing at distance, peppering her with kunai and shuriken. "Sinai Jashu." A snake shot out from her sleeve, heading toward the man. He looked startled for an instant, but got over his surprise quickly. He jumped back, but was too slow to evade the serpent completely. The long fangs had bitten through his sleeve before a stab with a kunai dispersed the snake. But there was now blood seeping from the wound. Anko smirked. At least a little bit of the venom had gotten in. Now it was only a matter of time before the man was out of commission. Then a yell of pain made her turn around. Iwana was kneeling on the ground, clutching at his belly. Blood was seeping between his fingers at an alarming rate. The AIM ninja holding a bloody kodachi swung his sword again. It cut between Akame's neck and shoulders. Crap, thought Anko. She was now alone, surrounded by 4 high chunin-level ninja. Her chances didn't look good. But she wasn't one to give in to despair. Her eyes found a convenient crate and with a quick hand seal she exchanged herself with it. One of the enemies guessed where she was going to appear and threw a kunai at her, but she evaded nimbly. Now that she didn't have anyone at her back, she could attack in earnest. Her fingers raced through seals. Katan, Gakakyu no Jutsu. The AIM ninja quickly scattered. Only the one bitten by Anko's snake was too slow to react. The flames enveloped him. When they died down, his previously soaked clothes were on fire. Anko smirked. "I love barbecue," she announced loudly. The shortest, and probably youngest, of her opponents was shocked by her proclamation. Perfect. Exactly what she wanted. She flung a handful of kunai at him. He shook of his distraction soon enough to get out of the way, but he didn't move far enough. The kunai slammed into an overturned wagon right behind him. Boom! Enko yelled merrily and the explosive note wrapped around the kunai handle went off. The young aim ninja was sent flying, his clothes scorched by the heat of the detonation. One down, the kunoichi cheered. "Who wants to go next?" "Me," a voice shouted behind her. Her eyes widened. She didn't hear anybody sneaking behind her. She half-turned, dodging the blow she could sense coming and ended right in the path of a vicious stab she didn't feel coming. The blade sliced through her trench coat and mesh bodysuit and stopped on her left shoulder blade. As she fell to her knees, she wasn't too surprised to notice there was nobody where she had originally expected her enemy to be. He must have projected his voice in a different direction. And how did he get there? "I thought I could see everybody." Her question was answered when she noticed one of the aim ninja dissolving into water. Fooled by a clone? She mentally berated herself. "I must be slipping." She kicked with her left leg. She hit the attacker in the knee. He hissed in pain and backed off. Enko quickly scrambled to her feet. She experimentally moved her left arm. She nearly blacked out with pain. It felt like her shoulder blade was shattered. Even though it probably wasn't true, she wouldn't be using it anytime soon. It meant that she was in deep trouble. The shinobi she had kicked had already shaken the effects and the two others were charging at her too. Then suddenly their feet stuck to the ground. The one on the left lost his balance and fell, his arms getting glued down as well. The other managed to remain upright. Sticky capture field, success, Izumo's self-satisfied voice resounded. Kotetsu emerged from behind the wagon carrying a giant spiked mace. Izumo soon followed with a huge kunai. The two trapped shinobi tried to free themselves, but Izumo's jutsu held fast. The two Konoha Chunin made short work of them. Enko meanwhile was busy defending against the one man who had gotten the drop on her. If he had thought that she would be an easy prey one-handed, he was forced to change his opinion soon. The kunoichi was fast in dodging and blocking. She couldn't get an attack in, but once Izumo and Kotetsu would join her, that would be easily remedied. The Rain Ninja realized it as well. He redoubled his efforts to defeat her. She barely dodged a vicious slash, her trench coat receiving a long tear. She retaliated with a savage kick, but the aim ninja evaded and stepped close to her. He punched her while she was off balance, sending her to the ground. Her injured shoulder blade sent waves of sharp pain into her whole body. The Rain Ninja stood above her, ready to finish her. She had trouble moving through her pain. Izumo and Kotetsu were still too far. She was about to panic when the air was suddenly filled with sinister chakra. On the fields Naruto found himself in dire straits. His opponent was simply too good for him. He was barely blocking his attacks and his clothes sported many tears. Only his new flak jacket saved him from any serious harm, but that couldn't last for long. If he only could create a wind blade, he could turn the tides of the battle in his favor, but the Rain Ninja didn't give him even the split second needed to concentrate. In Naruto's mind, Tenzo's voice was reminding him of the importance of being able to perform a technique even during the heat of the battle. The words were proving themselves true currently. The young Chunin had thought he was good enough, but it became painfully obvious that it wasn't the case. He was being outmatched in the terms of speed, physical strength, experience and favorable environment. All in all exactly the ingredients for a premature and gruesome death. The blonde wanted to avoid it no matter what. But what could he do? Since the beginning of the fight, he didn't get a chance to attack. The first lucky hit he got in only because his enemy had underestimated him, but there was no chance of it happening again. His opponent got closer and Naruto tried to kick him, but once again the adult man was faster. The Jinchuriki received a foot to his stomach and was sent skidding backwards. He landed on the road. His opponent was next to him in an eye blink, kicking him in the chest. Naruto was sent flying once more. He landed on the hard surface of the road, coughing up blood and gasping for air. The aim nin obviously considered him down for the count and strolled to him at a leisure pace. Tenzo's voice resounded in Naruto's head once again, telling him how stupid that was. He could now simply charge his sword with the wind chakra and slice him in half. Well, he could have done it if he hadn't lost the hold of his weapon when the rain ninja had kicked him the last time. But what else could he do? If he tried to make hand seals, the enemy would see. But what had the needed damage factor and didn't require hand seals? Naruto's mind immediately went to his newest creation. It was still far from perfect, but it would have to do. He charged wind chakra into his hands and willed it to make blades. He didn't try to make them move. He still couldn't keep them that way for long, so he would do it just before he would strike. Then he realized that the aim nin was already almost upon him. He launched himself from the ground with a roar and swung at the man's stomach. The ninja obviously underestimated the danger of Naruto's attack. He hit him on the head with his fist, causing Naruto to miss his belly, but the wind blade's enveloped fist struck his thigh instead. The tiny moving knives of wind cut through the skin and peeled it off. Then they continued into the muscle. Naruto didn't manage to keep his concentration long enough to cut the bone, but it was enough. The man screamed through his breather and collapsed to the ground. Naruto scrambled to his feet. His opponent was wounded, but not yet defeated. There was no time for dawdling. He had no intention of repeating the mistake that had cost the older man the fight. He drew a kunai from his pouch. He sent wind chakra into it and threw. His opponent almost managed to dodge. The blade pierced the side of his flak jacket, but failed to inflict serious damage. Naruto kicked. His ability to create wind blades on his feet had increased since the Chunin exams, but once again they were too short to cause anything more than a flesh wound. The aim nin got over his pain and counterattacked. His uninjured leg shot out, catching Naruto in the knee, making him fall to the ground. The attack was shortly followed by 3 thrown kunai. At such short distance, Naruto had no way to dodge. His arms shot forward, deflecting 2 of the 3 kunai. The third embedded itself in his right forearm. Naruto hissed and pulled it out. Then he sent it back to its owner, enhanced with wind chakra. The man made the fatal mistake of trying to deflect it. The sharpened blade cut through his forearm guard, slicing deep into the bone. Naruto smirked. The fight was finally turning in his favor. He got to his feet. The wound on his forearm was bleeding, but he paid little heed to it. It was already slowly closing. He noticed absent-mindedly that his sleeves were torn, completely shredded by his newest attack. He would have to replace the shirt. Or maybe buy a short-sleeved or a sleeveless one, but that was a matter for later consideration. Now he had an enemy to kill. He reached into his pouch for more kunai. The blood flowing along his arm reached the red mark on the back of his hand. The world suddenly turned red. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Guys, make sure to help the author by visiting the link in the description. This is Fox Sage, and I'm signing off.